So today on our builders call, we are going to go over maybe it's a touch different than some of the other calls you've done. I'm not sure if anyone's gone through this in a little bit more depth or not, but if you want to get into starting to build an agency, there's a few things when you're developing yourself into a leader that you've got to understand on how do you get into that position, and then you want to be someone that your team wants to work alongside. So very first thing that I wanted to touch on is like the mindset and understanding your role and kind of some of the sacrifice that comes with that if you decide that you want to go out and build and scale an agency. So your attitude is going to be massive, and you hear it a lot of times from like a producer standpoint, like attitude and activity, but that's no different on the building and scaling side of the business either. So when you're having people come in, it doesn't matter if you're having like a hard day, a hard week, a hard month. That is irrelevant to how you show up for the people that you decide to bring into the business. And something that I was given very early was this concept of no matter how it's going on your side, whenever somebody asks how you're doing, something as small as it could not possibly be any better. And that's something that I for sure have like stolen, ripped off, and tried to duplicate in depth as much as possible. So no matter what, regardless of how it's going for you, whether it's business or personal life stuff, it doesn't have anything to do with the people that you're working around. So you always want to be, hey, this could not be possibly going any better. Having a great day. What's going on with you? How's your day going? That kind of mindset day one is really, really helpful because people don't want to be around a quote unquote leader that's like a suck hole of energy. So just keep that in mind day one. You always have to be looking forward and moving forward, regardless of how hard it is inside or outside of your business, especially your outside stuff. Everybody typically will have stuff going on in their personal life. It has nothing to do with your business. So don't bring and pull all of your, personal, if you will, like problems into your business, because that is not going to help move the needle or help the business grow. And it's kind of like an uncomfortable exchange if you're just like trauma dumping onto people that you brought into your business that are like there to get your help. So that's kind of like the very first thing I wanted to talk about. And then um your personal sacrifice that comes with the day that you decide to bring somebody into your business, you give up the right to be average because now other people are looking to you, counting on you. So you're going to have to do stuff a little bit above and beyond, or a lot above and beyond um, what maybe you want to do. And something I got from like Zach, Andrew, and Sean is think about all the inconvenient things that you probably don't want to do, whether it's like it starts as like I don't really feel like dialing, but if you don't dial you can't make a paycheck because you have to call our clients. um, it's the same exact thing from taking really late night calls for producers or early calls or weekend calls. Those are really, really huge phone calls that you need to answer, especially when you're kind of trying to build something out of the gate. So taking those Saturday and Sunday calls, if somebody else is relying on you for assistance, obviously plugging them in and showing them access to resources is huge, but initially you need to be available to everybody that you bring into your business. Which again, it could be inconvenient to get the Saturday morning, the Saturday afternoon and evening, and then the Sunday calls, but they are counting on you. And if you made a promise like, hey, I'll show up for you as long as you show up, and then they're showing up and you're nowhere to be found, it's going to be really, really hard to build a agency because you'll have already broken that trust. So just understand when you get into building and scaling, that is going to come with some inconvenient responsibilities, which is a huge blessing. And they call that, earning your overrides. So if you want to build this passive income business, which that's why, a lot of us get into the building and scaling, you need to earn that each and every day and each and every week, etc. So make sure that if you're going to make a promise that like, hey, I'll have your back, I just need you to show up, they're doing all the stuff that's required and they just need a little assistance. You don't get to have maybe some of those conveniences of like, hey, I turn my business off at 5 p.m. every night because like I created a 8 to 5 work schedule for myself. That is going to be a very, very slow and painful kind of like lesson that you'll learn. So just to kind of recap that piece is your mindset and attitude always has to be locked in no matter what. And whenever you're having a difficult time, especially in your business, those conversations, you reach up to get help. You don't ever dump on people that you're bringing in the business about like, oh, guess what? I'm having this really hard time with this thing or this person or whatever it is. It has nothing to do with like their situation. It doesn't benefit or better anybody. So, kind of hard to do maybe in the earlier phases, but anytime that you have something you don't know how to do or need assistance with, or a problem you need to be solved, or having an issue with, someone that maybe you brought into your business, trying to figure that out, going to a bunch of other people in your organization and complaining to them is a terrible reflection on you personally. So just make sure whenever you're bumping into stuff, you always want to reach up, and then all you're doing is dumping positivity all over your entire agency in depth. That is like a very, very important piece of building and scaling we'll call it a company, an agency. And then don't forget about like the personal sacrifices that come in when you start to scale. Like you are going to have to show up during inconvenient times. That is what builds your trust with your people. And everything is a people-based business. So if you want to have good relationships and pour in and have this big agency, like that's going to be a requirement for you to be able to scale anything of value. You always have to be willing to show up. I got very lucky, and the people that I was listening to and plugged into the business with were always very, very available. We used to do Saturday morning 8 a.m. calls, and that's not everybody's favorite thing to do, but like, hey, this is when we have time to do the call before we go out and start selling for the day. So if you want help, this is when that call is going to be every Saturday morning. And just like small stuff like that can be a really, really big impact. Just as an example, like it was like Zach and I and maybe 5 or 6 agents when I first started working with him, and he always showed up to do all the right things, and now doing, 17 plus million a month as an agency. So it was a really easy example to follow. The other half to getting people to follow you and like replicate what you're doing, you don't have to necessarily be the 70, 80, 90, 100K type producer. But if you're wanting people to sell at a really high level and you've never executed on that thing, just understand that it's going to be hard for them to take advice and instruction and run that play if you have not yourself executed that in some sort of capacity. I think somewhere between 30 and 40 grand sets a really, really good example. Lets that Hall of Fame producer pace. There are other ways to build and scale that I just figured if the percentage was the majority of the $1 million a month agency owners and up were all initially Hall of Fame producers, and there's a tiny percentage that weren't, I would rather bet safe on the math of it. Like if I can at least sell to Hall of Fame, by default, I'll be able to train and develop, and it'll be easier to get people to follow what I'm doing. So I'll never, ever ask someone to do something that I wasn't willing to do. And then that also builds, again, that really, really strong foundation of, well, if he's doing it at this level and making this recommendation to me, it seemed like it went really well for him. So I want to listen, him or her. So I want to listen to very specifically what they're telling me to do because they've executed that. And I think starting with the production is the easiest way to do it because you have full control over what you can produce as an individual. You have a lot less control over getting people to do anything, even if it's for themselves in a good way. Like, hey, I want you to be successful and have a profitable agency just as an individual producer. We want to teach you how to like be a net profitable agent. If you're going out and doing the producing at a high level, it's very, very easy for others to follow that same kind of calendar, lead flow, lead plan, all that stuff. So make sure that you don't ever ask people to do something that you're unwilling to do, because eventually that will create a little friction. They'll want to know, why do I have to work 6, 7 days a week, but I've seen you on vacation 3 times this month on the weekends, whatever that is for that person. It's hard for them to trust the words without the action behind it. So being an action-based leader will build a lot stronger core. It'll build trust, and it's actually significantly easier to scale if you have a really good example for people to follow, and then you can teach the next person how to duplicate what you're doing. Otherwise, indefinitely, you'll have to be all things to all people, and an entity cannot grow if you're the only one that can train, the only one that can do lead plans, the only one that can set up calendars and kind of do the functioning role of a high level manager. It is going to eventually freeze because you can't do that with 100 people at the same time. But if you can do it with 10 and they can all do it with 2, by default, it'll grow on itself significantly faster. So I'm a huge fan of producing first and producing and leading by that production example, because again, it is way easier for people to follow your lead If that's what you're looking for, is develop into a good leader, which you should want that if you're going to build a business, want people to follow you. Production mathematically has the highest percentage of people that have done producing and then became really high level managers. So I would always recommend starting with the sales first. Maybe you grow slower than your good buddy who's running the recruiting play only, but if you can produce at a high level and then duplicate that, maybe it's slower up front, but it will explode on itself over time, because then you have 10, 15, 20 people doing the exact same thing that you were doing, selling 30, 40, 50 grand, whatever that number is, and then doing that in depth. It'll by default grow significantly faster. The catch 22 to that is you want to be really careful. It's the 80-20 rule. I don't know if you guys have heard of that before. It's pretty common in like business and sales, and it definitely is applicable to insurance. 20% of your entire group of people that you will work with will typically do about 80% of the production or 80% of the volume. So that doesn't mean that you don't go and show up and give back and be present for everybody. But if you have a one-on-one sit down and they're like, hey, I need to figure out how to get to this place, and then they don't follow through on any of the stuff that they promised they were going to do to meet their own big goals that they set for themselves, I don't want to be spending a ton of time trying to chase down and force someone else to make changes that they are the ones that have to do that on their own. So 80-20, 80% of your time should go to the 20% of the people that are doing the majority of the work and doing the action-based results type stuff. That is who you want to spend the most of your time with. If you are trying to drag somebody along, it ends up being uncomfortable for both of you, and it's not a good productive use of your time. And it's not that we're like disrespectful or talking down or mean to anybody. It's just, hey, you told me that this was the goal that you wanted, and now you're having a hard time, but I haven't seen you on any of the training calls. You haven't been live dialing with the group. You haven't showed up to the office in 3 weeks. All those little things is what you want to be watching for. And that's who you're going to put your time into, who's showing up, doing the work. Big mindset. I don't do any like negative complaining stuff. I feel like that's really hard to deal with. If every conversation I have with somebody is negative, like you kind of get two shots at it. It's different than reaching out and asking for help, but if it's constant complaints, I can't fix that part. So just something to keep your eyes on. If someone says they want to do all of these things in their business, but they're not even showing up for themselves, then it's kind of like well, hey, call me when you need anything, and then send me your metrics and let me figure out how I can help you. But if they're not following through, then we can't have that same conversation 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times with no changes being made, or else you'll just end up kind of running loops in a circle over and over and over and trying to figure out how to drag someone who's not working at the same capacity they said they were going to, and then trying to force a result that they haven't earned. So just kind of something to keep in mind. About the letting people steal your time that aren't doing the action items required to excel here. So the last little part of the mindset and the attitude and a little bit of ego stuff is, it's kind of like the capital agency disruption is our group that we adopted. We are not Steve Jobs. We just sell insurance, and we teach people how to sell insurance, and we're all out here doing our best and giving our all like every day. So just because you start to grow something, be very careful on how you view yourself. Like you should be confident and working a lot and like, hey, I can do anything that I want in this business if I show up long enough and do the right things. But at the end of the day, we're like not a bunch of billionaire tech Mongols that created something and, have this, like we just do insurance and we teach people how to sell insurance. So be careful as you start to see success and start to see that needle moved. Just a good reminder for us was always like, hey, I'm not Steve Jobs. I'm just doing some insurance stuff. And then realizing how big the space is and how big the life insurance industry is. We're like a tiny little grain of sand in the Sahara for like how big the overall industry is. So always doing like a little self check of like, hey, I've made some really good progress. Here's what I'm really proud of. But we also just do insurance and we try to do it at an extremely high level and do a really good job. But don't wear your ego around nonstop. It's also really, really hard to follow people like that. And Sean's been drilling that since I was brand new of, you can't have a big ego and a big business. So try not to get too like impressed with yourself mentally. Doesn't mean you can't celebrate small wins or big wins, but you want to be very, very careful on how important that you think you are too soon. And a big cool wake up call was we were at a meeting, and Sean had talked about like, hey, raise your hand if you've got a big business. And he was like, I'm not going to raise my hand because I don't have a big business. Because if you look at the other businesses and the scale that some of these companies are doing, we have a lot of growing to do. And that was kind of like, well, if he doesn't think he has a big business, I certainly do not. So like I got a lot of work to do to be able to get up to like the medium-sized business. So that is a huge piece in like leadership and building, is always be thankful and grateful. I think gratitude will go the farthest, whether you're grateful for like all the people that are putting in the work to help you grow the business, or the people above you that are pouring into to teach you how to make adjustments faster and showing up for you. Be very, very grateful to have those people in your agency or in your leadership. And that will allow you to go significantly farther faster. So I know that's kind of like a funny one, but it is really a huge impact if people feel like, oh, this guy just thinks he's, you know, all that and some. You're gonna be kind of hard to work with. So just keep in mind, dude, we're just a bunch of regular people that are absolutely doing our best to like sell and teach other people how to do it, and show people how to become financially free through the platform that Sean had built. Um, okay, the other big piece that I wanted to make sure that I addressed, some major leadership lessons that I have learned that have been very helpful, that I wish I could have undone a little bit sooner probably, is figuring out how different individuals want to be coached. There's a bunch of different mentalities when it comes to this type of stuff. I think if you just keep in mind now, when you're first getting started, having this attitude where like, I'm only going to work with the elite because I want to have an elite group only. And if you're not willing to do, if you don't want to sell 50 to 75 to 100 grand, like, I don't really want you to work with me because I'm only looking for greatness. Like, that is a very strange way to build an organization and force your goals onto other people. So always make sure that you're adjusting how you teach and train and work with other people based on what their goals are to start. Any time that you're putting your goals on other people, it's going to cause some really strange friction. And we're all a bunch of independent contractors. So when I first came here, I just kind of wanted to sell and be left alone. I didn't have an interest in doing like this big building an agency and doing recruiting. I barely could like survive just learning how to sell initially. So that is what I wanted to focus on. And nobody ever messed with my stuff or was like, oh, you're not allowed to work here if you don't want to build a company. Like, you have to do these things or else. And they kind of just let me decide over time that like, well, if I learned how to sell and got myself in a, much better financial situation, now I feel like not sharing it with other people would be a little bit selfish, because I'm just a regular person that worked a lot and went through some like hard stuff to figure out how to sell insurance. So like, who else do I know that may be in sales or looking for a sales job, that I could bring in and then teach? But nobody forced me to do or required me to do anything. They were like, hey, this is what we're doing. If you want to get into this part of the business, here's kind of like the play that we're running. So don't force your goals onto other people. Now, for that tiny percent of a percent of a percent of people that tell you like, hey, I'm the type of guy, like, I'm the type of person that I need really, really like firm, hard coaching. So if you want to call me up and yell at me and tell me I'm doing terrible and talk a little smack to me, like, that's what I like. I found out that that's not really what the majority want. And it's not actually that helpful when you're like trying to build something. There's out of the percent of people that ask for really firm, like, I want you to push me type coaching, there's a percent of those people that actually want to be hard coached like that. So if you can always give it a test run, which I certainly did. It's not something that I would say was my best leadership phase of my career. I just didn't know any better. I came from coaching college and, being a college athlete. So the only way that I knew it was to kind of have this like cutthroat, we are going to win or getting seconds last, kind of So that was a hard thing for me to adjust coming into working with all sorts of different types of people with different goals. And a great rule of thumb would be if they are happy where they're at and making what they need to make and not complaining, then there's no reason for me to put a bunch of unnecessary pressure on them that they didn't ask for. Or even if they did ask for it, be very careful on how you actually have those conversations. Um, an example that I can give you would be had a guy that had gone out and sold like 40, 42, 43 grand in a month before. And for the last several months, he'd had those first 2 weeks of the month was really, really difficult. Like he just had a hard time closing the first 2 weeks for some reason. But then the last 2 to 3 weeks of the month is when he would do almost all of his production. And he was like, hey, can I get some feedback on like, am I doing something weird? Am I doing something wrong? And this was a dude who's one of the hardest workers in my entire group. And he was kind of like, he had asked for some really, really firm coaching. And if my response would have been, well, have you tried not being so weak-minded and just doing your job for the first 2 weeks? That would have been of zero benefit to anybody because he came actually looking for an adjustment or instruction. So even though he totally could have handled a really hard conversation, it would have produced no results and no benefit to lead with like insults and aggression. And then he's like, I actually just really wanted to get help. So recognizing that and like, all right, well, you're a 40K producer. Obviously, you're an animal. Let's sit down and see if we can figure out if there's anything in the schedule, if you're starting to rush, if you're missing key things in your sales process, whatever that is. And then we went down the productive feedback and adjustment route instead of like, dude, you're a 40K producer. Why don't you stop crying all day? You know, it's not a net benefit to coach somebody like that. And he could handle it and has asked for some pretty direct coaching prior. But in that specific moment, it only hurts, not helps. So belittling, which I don't know if I would say I've gone down the belittling route a ton, but just having an aggressive coaching style, the majority don't want that. They want constructive feedback so that they can improve, which it'd be like if Sheila had got a hold of me or something like that and was like, hey, I'm trying to figure out like why I'm getting this miss or something like that, then I would say, okay, so here's some stuff that I heard that I really, really like. Here's what you're doing a great job of, Sheila. I really like how you introduce yourself, and you're really, really firm on that why part, which is awesome. One thing I think you might be able to adjust is you kind of like didn't set any structure of the appointment and you totally skipped all of their income or you skipped half their medical stuff. And I think if you slowed down a little bit through this inventory sheet and got a little bit more data, you would see a lot different result at the very end of your appointment because now you've got structure and you've got income. And if we know that we're going to get budget objections, like let's try to figure out like a soft debt to income type budget so you stop getting to think about it at the end. That would be a much more constructive conversation than being disrespectful or kind of like blowing it off like, well, yeah, you're doing fine, so why don't you just work more? Or yeah, you should just dial more. Or like, have you tried closing more? Like, I'm not closing on purpose, by the way. Easton, can you please stop yelling? So little stuff like that. Most people want love and hugs and like, here's where you're doing a great job. Here's where I think you could make an adjustment to get better. That will function 190% better for pretty much everyone that you're ever going to work with. So just identifying, here's what you do really well, and here's where I think you struggle. And it could flip-flop from like, all right, Sheila, so last week you told me you closed at an 85% ratio, right? So you got an 80% close rate, but we went through all of your metrics for the week and you only worked 3 days. And you barely made any dials. So your closing is not, you're actually crushing it on the closing thing. Sheila, I think where we can make an adjustment is why don't we up our lead flow because you already have confidence to close. We just don't have enough inventory and we don't have enough working hours to get to the level that you are wanting to be at. So like, why don't we just make this little adjustment this week? It's that type of feedback when you're meeting people to try to point them in the direction that can help them improve will be a significantly stronger way to build really good relationships and help people accomplish what they want to accomplish without you forcing, like, I think everyone should work 90 hours a week and I think everyone should sell 75 grand a month. And if you're not willing to do that, you can't work with me because we don't have anything in common. That is a terrible way to build your business because you need a little bit of everybody in your business, with the exception of bad attitude and complaining people. You don't ever need them in your business ever. But having someone who sells 20 grand a month that's happy, that doesn't have, a ton of financial responsibilities, they're making what they need to make, for me to force them to step into like a schedule or a lead plan and, demand all these things of them when they're actually fired up about getting that far, there's no reason to have those kind of conversations. If they went, how do I go from 20 to 30? That's a different conversation than like, Dwight, looks like you did 20 last month. Want to reach out and say congrats. Please let me know if you need anything. How do you feel about last month? And then just you're going to go through with me. Like, honestly, I can't believe it. It's the most I've ever made in a month. I couldn't be, happier. Thank you for all the help, blah, blah, blah. Cool. We don't have to go into anything else. It's just let me know if you ever want to get to the next level or if I can ever do anything for you. Just holler, and being available, but not pushing people to do stuff that when they're already fired up and happy. So that's kind of like the big core stuff that I wanted to run through. That's probably like the biggest leadership lesson that I have learned is positive reinforcement followed up by actionable items that they can correct. It will always function better than this like yell culture coaching, which I think only works in very, very unique environments or with a very, very small group of people. It's hard to run a really large scale operation if every time you show up somewhere, people are terrified you're going to start screaming at them and tell them how bad they are at the job. So I wanted to just kind of like leave off with that for the day, from attitude to expectations of becoming a leader. Big fan of leading with production first because that will set the stage for those that want to follow you. And it's a lot easier to get them to follow you if you're doing all the stuff that you are asking or recommending other people do. I know we have a couple of short minutes left on here. I think we try to keep this right about 30. So if you guys have maybe like one or two short questions, I can certainly answer them and then we'll wrap this thing up. Okay. Looks like we are rock solid on questions. So thank you guys for showing up, and hopefully you got one or two small things that you can try to implement and build a really fun, hardworking, high-performing culture. Thank you guys all for getting on, and next week, same time, we'll have another guy on here.